Get out of this lake right now. You have no right to fish here. That's what Vivian Blackwater snarled at me, finger stabbing at the morning air, like I'd just broken into Fort Knox. Her little HOA entourage stood behind her with their arms folded and eyes sharp, all of them so sure they were about to win something big. Maybe even run me off my own patch of earth. I just watched her, let her words settle over the glassy water, not even flinching, not even blinking. Because sometimes the best way to answer that kind of threat is to let the silence do the work for you. Let me back up a sec, because you need to picture it. Early May, that smell of wet dirt after the rain, honeysuckle thick on the breeze, steam swirling off my coffee cup as I sit beside a lake I've fished since my hair was brown. Down below, 5 koi champions, all of them, drift through the clear water like living jewels, their scales flashing gold and crimson and pearl. The oldest, Golden, has been in this lake longer than most folks in this neighborhood have owned their houses, and I'd been trusted to watch over these fish by an old friend, the governor himself. 50 grand of living, swimming history, more than some folks' cars, more than most of these HOA folks will ever understand. So when Vivian, with her expensive track suit and a voice that could etch glass, strutted up to my dock and called me a trespasser, it was almost funny, almost. Because I'd seen her type before, the kind who gets a taste of power from telling other people how to mow their lawns, then starts thinking they can rewrite history and bulldoze anything that stands in the way of their new patio plan. Her board backed her up, Tom the lapdog, Susan the retired teacher still grading adults, Robert the accountant who probably did HOA finances in his sleep, and Marcus, the new guy, who believed all this really mattered. They stood there, and she demanded I answer for my crime. I reached into my jacket, unfolded the piece of paper I'd carried for decades, and let it catch the morning light. That stopped her. Vivian stepped back, all the color draining from her face, suddenly looking like a kid who realized the test was today, not next week. "How do you have that?" she whispered, voice cracking. The whole crew behind her started shifting, all that bravado leaking out like a tire with a nail in it. You ever see fake authority fall apart in real time? It's a thing of beauty. They thought they had the law, the bylaws, the moral high ground. But what they didn't know is I'd been expecting this. For months, I'd seen them peering at my land, taking photos, just walking by at odd hours, and I'd noticed a black sedan, wrong kind of car for a county employee, parked across the street twice a week, always with a man in a suit, briefcase too thin to carry real work. The whole setup stank of a bigger play than just neighborhood squabbling. "Mrs. Blackwater," I finally said, using the same calm I used back when I had real authority, when it mattered. "You're pretty sure of yourself this morning." She straightened up, thinking I was bluffing, not realizing calm doesn't mean surrender. But see, my paper wasn't just a fishing license. It was a piece of federal law, signed in 1943, from the Department of Agriculture itself. It gave the Harper family, my family, exclusive rights to fish and manage this lake, in perpetuity, for services rendered in World War II. The kind of rights that survive town councils, HOA presidents, even greedy developers with fancy lawyers. I read the certificate out loud, every word heavy and sharp as a judge's gavel. You could feel the air change, the birds stop singing, even nature holding its breath. Vivian opened her mouth, tried to argue, but you can't argue with history, not when it's in writing and sealed in government plastic. Marcus, the new guy, tried to save face. Laws change, right? But I reminded him, with the patience of a teacher and the bluntness of a Marine, that federal law doesn't rot just because it's old. My grandfather built water systems that fed this town. He didn't do that for a plaque. He did it so families, decades later, wouldn't go thirsty. That's what the law remembered. That's what this whole place forgot. Their committee started to drift, one by one. Susan suddenly remembered an appointment. Tom mumbled about his calendar. Robert did math in his head, counting how $10,000. A pop federal fine stack up quick for interfering with protected property. And Marcus, bless him, realized the real cost of being on the wrong side of a federal statute. But Vivian, stubborn as old gum on a hot sidewalk, clung to her fiction. She claimed there must be new rules, something that wiped away old wartime orders, as if the world reset for her convenience. But she didn't know half the story. The lake wasn't just pretty. My grandfather designed it to survive sabotage and drought, tied into springs that fed the entire neighborhood. The koi? They were more than pets. They were environmental warning systems. Lose them, and the whole water network's at risk. And that risk, well, it wasn't just local anymore. Because while Vivian and her committee fumed, a developer named Morrison was moving pieces behind the scenes, hiring surveyors, feeding rumors, whispering in HOA ears about fair access and community benefit. Morrison made his money buying up land by any means, even if it meant bending the law until it broke. And sure enough, 3 days after the showdown, flyers showed up in every mailbox, blaming me for hoarding resources. Facebook groups popped up overnight, slick graphics, outrage on tap, classic AstroTurf, not grassroots. Emily, the reporter, called me for a balanced interview. I could tell by her questions she'd been coached. Keep it about community. Avoid the word federal. Her article turned the whole thing into a he said, she said, burying the law in favor of drama. The real play, though, wasn't the neighbors. It was Morrison and his people, pushing from behind, building a campaign of pressure, legal and otherwise, to make my life so miserable I'd want to sell. Nathan at the tackle shop got visits from concerned citizens. Linda, my neighbor, was asked about zoning changes. Intimidation, soft at first, then harder. And then, when the pressure didn't work, they went nuclear. Early Tuesday morning, 2 men in coveralls dumped gallons of herbicide and fish toxin into my lake, enough to kill everything. I found golden belly up by the shore, the water thick with poison, the smell of chemicals so sharp it burned my eyes. You know what I mean? It wasn't just about the fish. The lake fed the water supply for 3 neighborhoods, 3,000 people, kids, elderly, whole families. By noon, the ER was flooded with poisoning victims. Margaret Blackwater, Vivian's own sister, a doctor, was nearly killed. I remember sitting by Golden's body, feeling the kind of helpless rage that makes your hands shake. Federal agents swarmed the neighborhood. The FBI, the EPA, hazmat suits, news cameras. They treated it as terrorism because that's what it was, an attack on public infrastructure for profit. The evidence piled up fast. Earl, the HOA security guard, turned whistleblower, recording Vivian and Morrison plotting on the phone. Vivian's words, "I don't care if the fish live or die. Just make that lake unusable." That's when the masks finally came off. The trial was a circus. Media everywhere, victims' families in the front row, the governor testifying about my grandfather's legacy. Margaret took the stand, her voice still rough from the ventilator, and described exactly how the poison was delivered, exactly how her own sister nearly killed her. Vivian tried to claim she was pressured, that Morrison was the real villain, but her phone records, her emails, her own words on tape, none of it could be explained away. The verdict? Swift. Damages in the millions, criminal sentences for Vivian and Morrison, 15 years and 25 years, respectively. The judge made it clear, federal property rights aren't up for grabs, and anyone who thinks otherwise is in for the fight of their lives. Operation Lake Grab, the feds called it, biggest bust of environmental terrorism and property fraud in decades. Morrison's whole operation unraveled, state lines didn't protect his network, and federal law landed like a hammer. After all that, you'd think the story would end there, right? But real life isn't that tidy. There were apologies. Linda brought cookies and a letter from the neighborhood. Fundraisers sprang up to restore the lake. The EPA sent a whole team. The kids from the local school came out to plant reeds and release the new koi the governor donated. Some folks still grumbled, still clung to conspiracy theories, but most finally understood what was at stake. The lake was never about just fishing. It was about legacy, trust, law, and the line you draw when someone tries to take what's yours, what's everyone's, in a way. A year later, as I sit by the water, the new koi, hope, justice, courage, wisdom, and friendship, circle in the morning light. Kids laugh on the bank, neighbors share stories, and the water runs clear as it did in my grandfather's day. The property is safe, the law held, but the scars remain, a reminder that vigilance never ends. Margaret, now a community leader, educates people about environmental rights. The case changed laws, inspired acts of Congress, and put would-be bullies on notice. And yet, as the sun dips behind the trees and the last light glances off the water, I know this isn't really my victory. It belongs to everyone who ever stood up, who ever said enough, who defended what was right, not just what was theirs. Because sometimes the battles that matter most don't make headlines until someone refuses to back down. Sometimes it takes losing everything, then fighting like hell to get it back, to remind a place of what really matters. So, have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Ever gone up against the system, or your own neighbors, and come out the other side, scarred but standing? I want to hear it. Share your story below. Let's talk about justice, about community, about the lines we draw and the things we refuse to lose. Because in the end, that's what keeps the water clear. That's what keeps us whole.